This presentation walks you through the steps of Sgraffito. Sgraffito means to scratch the surface in order to make a mark. This presentation is broken down into 4 parts. Part 1 is applying slip or underglaze to the surface of your vessel. If you plan to Sgraffito through a color to reveal the clay body, then I would recommend doing part 1 first so that you can work on your image transfer while each layer is drying. Part 2 will be preparing your image to transfer to the surface of your form. Part 3 will be transferring the image to your form. And Part 4 will be the actual act of Sgraffito. In order to successfully accomplish the technique of Sgraffito, you're going to need some of the following. You may not use all of this here. In order to prepare your form with decorating slip, you are going to need a large, thin brush and either underglaze, as you see here. This is the Amico Velvet Underglaze, or you're going to need decorating slip that you find at the studio. That's going to prepare your form. In order to get your design ready to transfer, you're going to need a ruler, pencil with an eraser, a string, and blank paper. In order to scratch the design into the surface of your form, otherwise known as Sgraffito, I'm going to show you a few options that you have so that you don't have to go out and buy anything if you don't want to. But let me show you what a typical Sgraffito tool looks like. This is a typical Sgraffito tool. You'll notice that there are these little balls on the end that are of different sizes. So that is what you're going to use to scratch the surface. If you don't have these, that's okay. If you have them and you're not sure what it's for, now you know. Now these tools also come in sets, and you'll notice in the set that there are different sizes of those balls at the end. And of course, the different size is going to determine the width of your line. Now, if you don't have anything like that, that is okay because you can use pencils. What I would do if you decide that you're going to use pencils is get maybe 4 or 5 pencils and have the size of the tips different. So some of them can be really run down to where they're just a nub, and another pencil may be very sharp. And that's going to essentially give you the different width of line like the set of tools does. You also have your needle tool for very thin lines. In addition to Sgraffito or scratching the surface with these tools, you may actually want to carve into the surface as well. And this is where the wire tools come in handy. So I've talked a lot about these wire tools because they are my favorite tools. And these are the carving tools. And they come in different shapes and different sizes. So if you have anything like this, go ahead and grab them. I probably have 20 wire tools that are all different, but you may not have that. Just get what you've got because I am sure that you are going to use them. And then you also want a clean brush, because what's going to happen is as you're scratching the surface, you're going to get these little burrs and things that are on your surface, and you're going to want to brush them off with a brush. You're never going to want to take your hand and wipe them off. Applying slip so that you can Sgraffito through the slip to reveal the color of the clay body. A few things to consider about that. First of all, your actual clay body color. That's going to determine the color of slip that you're going to use. It doesn't make sense that if you're using a buff clay body, which is going to turn tan, that you put a yellow slip on, right? It just doesn't make sense to do that. So for something like buff, I'm going to go ahead and do a terracotta because I know my buff is kind of an earthy tone. It's going to be kind of a sandy color, and terracotta is going to have that orange pop, and I kind of like those two things together. If you're using porcelain, black is always beautiful with porcelain. You've got a really nice contrast there. Blues and greens also work really nice with porcelain. but not as much with buff. So, same with B-Mix. B-Mix is a lighter buffy color. That's going to probably be better with something like a terracotta, or if you do get into like a darker blue or a darker green, that might look okay on B-Mix. If you're using red clay, then of course you wouldn't want to use terracotta slip, right? You would want to use a white slip or a black slip or something that is contrasting. So the point is, whenever your clay body is going to be at vitreous or after it's fired to its maturity, you're going to want a colored slip that is going to be in contrast to that color. So don't be fooled by what it looks like now, right? Because this is going to change its color once it gets through 2 of the firings. As far as slip goes, first of all, we're not talking about our nasty attaching slip, right? That is the same color of the clay body because it should be the clay body. Nope, we are talking about either studio slips, which are going to come in, big containers at the studio. A studio slip is going to be more pastel unless you're dealing with black or the terracotta color. There's usually like a red-brown there. Those can be pretty vibrant colors. I don't know if vibrant's the right word. They're not pastel, but a lot of the greens and blues and yellows and pinks, they're going to be a little more pastel. So just kind of know that. Your other option is to go with an underglaze, which I do the Amico velvet underglazes for reasons I've mentioned in the past, but I'll go ahead and mention that again really quickly. The Amico velvet underglazes, they can usually, they're a cone 0405, but they can usually go up to cone 910. Now some of them lose their color, but the beauty of the Amico underglazes is that they have color charts that you can just get on. I think it's amico.com, something like that. That might not be it, but you can just get on the website or get on their website and look at the color chart, and it shows you what the color looks like at cone 0405, what the color looks like at cone 56, and what the color looks like at cone 910. So that's kind of important to know that, because some of these do burn out, some of them will change their color. And also the glaze that you put on top of this is also going to change the color. So if you are not using what Amico is suggesting on their color charts, you're probably going to want to do a quick little test tile. I know that in my studio at school, the clear that we have, there's a green that Amico, it just completely loses color with the clear glaze that we have at school. So you just never really know. It's a chemical thing, you know what I mean? So always test it if you are doing anything different. I'm going to go ahead and use the Amico terracotta because I've got buff. I also am going to want to use my paintbrush that is a natural fiber brush and the thicker one. I don't really want like a teeny tiny paintbrush, right? Like the more that I can go in, the less painting I have to do, the better. So the more that I can get in one stroke, the better. So I'm going to go ahead and use my brush here. I've put a little bit of water in my underglaze here. It still might be a little bit too thick. Underglaze is a funny thing because, and remember, underglaze is just a decorating slip. It's just slip with color in. Just remember that. It's commercial, however, so they do fancy things and make it better. But usually when you get these underglazes, they are pretty thick. You're probably going to want to water them down. And really, this should probably be a heavy cream consistency. Mine is probably a little bit too thick here, but we're going to see what happens. If you put it on too thick, the brush strokes from the brush are going to show up, right? They're going to be bumpy because the material itself is too thick. Like if you put on really thick paint, you can see the brush strokes. So you have to watch out for that. Also, if you put slip or underglaze on too thick, it will flake off. And it can flake off either at this stage or it can flake off after it's actually gone through the kiln. So we want this on thin, but we want multiple layers of it. If you just put one layer on, it's actually going to end up looking really streaky. So those are just a few things about the underglaze. The other thing about the underglaze is when do you put it on? This is very soft leather hard, if that. So if I put the underglaze on now, it really is going to be a part of this clay body. It's kind of one of those things like the sooner that you can get it on, the better. The problem is that I'm going to put it on and it's going to take a day for it to dry up enough for me to put a second coat on. Because if I just kept putting it on at this state, what's going to happen is my second layer is just going to pull off from my first layer. So I'm going to go ahead and put one on today, and then I will probably wait and put a second coat and hopefully a third coat on as each coat dries. If you wait until this gets like hard leather hard, you're not going to have the same adhesion. It is going to adhere, but there's just that slight risk that you take that maybe it just doesn't adhere, and then there may be what we call crawling, like the glaze might actually pull up on the underglaze and pull it away from the clay body here. So you have to be careful about that. Really, these are rated to go on at leather hard, so you really are okay to do that if you have to wait. The one nice thing about leather hard is that when you put it on, you may not have to wait so long for it to dry up because the clay body is going to pull the water out a lot quicker. So just know that it's kind of whatever you need to do. Just know that those are those differences in there. The other thing about crawling, if you take your rubber rib and you just rib, and you do what we call burnishing, where you take the surface of the clay and you kind of flatten out all the platelets, and it looks real beautiful. It looks shiny and gorgeous, but what you're doing is you're taking a somewhat porous surface and you are actually sealing that surface. So if you over rib and then put underglaze on, there is a chance that the underglaze is not going to adhere to the clay body. It's not going to like sink in, and when you get that glaze on, again, that glaze might pull the underglaze or the slip away from the clay body because the slip just didn't have anywhere to go. I would never put, well, I shouldn't say never, at least for this application, where I'm doing the whole thing, I'm changing the color of the clay body, I would not use underglaze on bone dry. I would not have this bone dry and then put underglaze on it. I feel like it's dangerous. I don't feel like it's going to adhere as well to the clay body. Kind of the wetter the better, but leather hard is also okay. Now, we are going to be sgraffitoing through the surface, or we're going to be carving through the surface, either one. And because of that, we don't carve until it's hard leather hard, like hard leather hard. So just know that. You do have plenty of time to get this underglaze on there because we are not carving until hard leather hard. So again, I'm going to put a little bit more water in here because I'm a little worried. This is just, I feel like that's a little too thick. So let me put a little more water in there. That's more like yogurt before I actually go in and paint this. Because I'm me and I do stupid shit, I went to, first of all, when you add water to anything, always turn the faucet on first so that you get it to the stream that you need, and then you put the work in, or you put the material under the water and pull the material out, which I did because I learned the hard way a long time ago not to actually have, you know, the container under the water while you turn the faucet on. That is bad. Don't do that. But what I ended up doing is I was turning the water off while my container was still under the faucet, and I turned it the wrong way. So I'm pretty watery now, but maybe this is okay. So that's pretty watery, but I'm not too concerned at this point. I just may have to put more layers on. So we will see what happens here. Okay, I do know that I want my inside glaze to come out to the outside, so I am actually going to set really strongly. I want to make sure that my arm, I'm going to brace myself, and I'm going to turn this while I put an incised line so that I know where I need to stop with my glaze. And I think probably right there is good. As long as I don't move my hand at all, which I did, I should meet the line at the same spot. I could have done better. The good news is I can go ahead and fix that. Whatever. It's been a really long day. Okay, now I want a Lazy Susan. I want a turntable. I want something that is going to help me do this. You can put it on a potter's wheel to let it go around that way too, but you definitely want something to make this a little bit easier for you. And you can just come in here and start putting this on. So you can see how watery that is. And really, that's okay. That's okay. You can see though that at least for Sgraffito, why I'm going to need more than one layer. You can see all those brush marks in there. And maybe that's something you would want if you were just dealing with the form. But because you're going to be Sgraffitoing, you really want to make sure that you have a solid color, because essentially you're changing the color of the clay body. And that's kind of why you're doing this. Okay. I'm going to come back up here and try to get this a little better up here. And see if I really want, I don't know if I want that much. Well, maybe I do. I'll have to think about that. If I want this to be less glazed, then I will go ahead and get rid of that line that I made, and I'll come up and deal with it then. Do you see how the slip is shiny? Do you see that it's shiny? You don't want to put your second layer on until all of that sheen is completely gone. That's when you know you're ready for a second layer. And when I go to do my second layer, I may go ahead and do it this way to kind of fill in some of the problems that I had. I do want my final coat to be going in this direction because it's easy to do that and I can get a pretty smooth coat on. So the next time that I see you, I will put a second coat on. I'm going to just see, it's starting to actually dry out a little bit. But I'm not going to. I'm going to do what I know is right, and I'm going to leave this. I might smooth it out a little bit. I have those little kind of rings where my brush hit. I'm going to smooth that out a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it until it actually dries. Okay, I think, ooh, you see how it pulled up from the previous layer when I did that? Depending on how wet this is going to determine when you can actually put your second coat on. If I were to just let this hang out, I could probably do it in a few hours. If it was hard, leather hard, I could probably do it in 20 minutes. So it just is going to depend. Also, the more coats you put on, the longer it takes for each coat. So my first coat might dry faster than my second coat. It just depends again on how wet everything is. One more thing, I don't want to put my plastic on this right now because the plastic is going to get into the wet slip and it's going to make a texture. Now, if I know this doesn't have any underglaze on it, so if I could get my plastic not to touch, I could go ahead and do that, but I would not take the chance of that because once you get texture in the underglaze, it's really not good. It's pretty hard to get out actually, so I am not going to do that. Now, I want to remind you that, you know, when I do wrap this up, I do need a towel down, a sheet or a neat piece of newspaper down because this is going to continue to shrink, and I want to make sure that there's no friction between the board and the work, because it could crack my bottom if I don't get it off of this board and onto a sheet, something that will actually move with the work. There you go. I am slipped and ready to go. I have got 4 coats of underglaze on here because my underglaze was so thin. You may only have 3. You should at least have 3 or 4 though. And remember, too thick, it's gonna flake off. Too thin, it's gonna look super streaky. So you do have to have a nice firm coat on there before you actually go to Sgraffito. So now I am ready to Sgraffito. A little sidebar. When I made my vessel, I took some clay at that time and I rolled it flat. I have a few of these right now. I did this so that while I was slipping, I could go ahead and slip this as well. Now this is going to end up being my scratch pad, right? Because before I ever go to Sgraffito this and cut through this surface, I want to practice. I want to see what different marks do and how they look. I may even put a little value chart in here so I understand what my values are, which I will show you an example of that. But I just want you to be aware now that if you didn't already roll the slab out, go ahead, get that slab rolled out so that you can slip it while you're slipping this. Now, if you have to roll it out and everything's still wet, that's okay. It's just going to take a few more coats or a few more time between coats to actually make it happen. But remember that a slab is going to lose a lot of its water very quickly if it's on wood or if it's on canvas or if it's on plaster. So if you're trying to get it to dry faster, that's what you're going to do. And then now you have this to experiment with before you ever actually go onto your vessel. Because doing a project that deals with the surface and the design of the surface, you are going to want to draw this out to begin with, right? Before you ever coil, you may want to draw this out so that you have some idea of what you're looking at. If you're reacting to the form, that's a little bit different of a story, but I wanted to show you that this is where I started. Now, when I went to do the demo, I forgot what I wanted my form to be. I wasn't even thinking about that, but this actually works out because what happens if you had gone through your sketches and you realize, my sketch form and what I ended up with does not look the same. Well, then you don't want to continue using your sketch form. So I just wanted to show you that. I also wanted to just talk quickly about why it was important to have 3 sides. Right? Because it's, your sketch shouldn't be just one side. How are these things going to connect? And that's what I'm going to talk about when I talk about actually putting the form on, putting a surface design on your form and making sure that it is seamless. So these are still just sketches. They're just giving you a general idea of kind of some of the things that are going to happen. Now, when I coiled my form, this ended up being my form. So you can see there is definitely a difference in form. Because my form was pretty darn close to my template, I could go ahead and just use my template to outline my form, right? So just using that, I get an idea of what my form actually looks like. If your form looks like your template, then you are ready to go to the next stage. If not, however, if some things had happened along the way, you are going to want to redraw your form. You are going to want to redraw your form. And you're going to want to redraw it at least tall and as wide as it actually is. This is going to make a little bit more sense in a minute, but you are going to just take your ruler, you're going to go to your actual form, and you are going to measure the height and the width and just try to get this drawn out again. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point, but you do want to have a general idea. Once you have your form redrawn out, and it should at least be as high as your actual form, you're going to want to make a little chart that looks like this. I'm going to actually show you how to do this here in a second, but I do want to show you what this looks like, and I want to show you where I've actually measured. I am going to be using a string, which I will demonstrate, but I just want you to see the most important things that are happening here. You do want to know how wide your base is, right? You also want to know how wide your widest area is. So this is going to be your belly. You're going to want to know where your shoulder is, where your neck is, and where your top is, or your rim. So those are kind of the parts that you're going to be measuring for, and this is just going to help you when you go to lay out your design. To measure your vessel for your image transfer, you are going to need the drawing that you made of your vessel. Now this should look pretty similar to your vessel at this point. It doesn't have to be perfect because the measurements are going to be what you're actually going to use when you go to blow up or lay out this. So remember, it's almost like we're cutting this open and pulling it open that way so that you can put your imagery down and so that everything is placed right and everything is scaled right. So we need to know what this looks like. So you're going to need that initial drawing that you made, and you're going to need a string. Now let's talk about strings. This is a shoestring. Shoestrings stretch, or at least most say that 3 times fast. Shoestrings stretch. Say it 3 times. That's a tongue tire. Don't get a stretchy string, because I guarantee, I went through and did this and I was like, I'm going to pull it taut every time because it's stretchy, and I know it's stretchy. And I messed up on some of my measurements because, of course, you're not doing that the right way. Try to get rid of a stretchy string. I knew better, but I was too lazy, I guess, to find a string that wasn't stretchy. So get a string that is not stretchy. This string does not stretch. And your string needs to be long enough to go around the big part of the vessel. So in order to start measuring, you're going to need your ruler, and you're going to need a string, and you're going to need a piece of paper with your drawn form on it. You should have already measured the height of your vessel to do your drawing, right? So you should already know how tall your vessel is, but you may not know where all the other body parts fall. So you're going to be measuring for the foot, and this is the height of the foot. So I know that my foot is 1/4 inch. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark on here that I am 1/4 inch high. My belly is coming in at 3 inches, so where my belly is on here, I'm going to make sure that I understand that that's 3 inches high, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to keep doing that. And then once I have those measurements in, and I put my lines across here, because I understand that this is where I am measuring, if I'm measuring for the belly, then I can go ahead and grab a string and do my measurements. So I just talked about measuring for the belly. I'm going to take my string, and where that belly is, or my widest point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, where my string touches, I'm going to keep that in my hand. So that is how that is the circumference of my vessel. And then I'm going to take my ruler and I am going to measure. Now your belly is probably going to be bigger than 12 inches, so just know that. So I'm going to make sure that I know where I stop, and I'm going to have to add 12 inches plus 6 inches, and that gives me my belly measurement. And I'm going to write that belly measurement in there so that when I go to open this vessel up, I know that I'm going to be actually measuring 18 inches across. You're going to do that for your foot. So I know that my foot measures this long in circumference. You're going to do that for your shoulder and your neck and your rim. You're going to do that and then put all of those measurements on your form so that when you go to blow this up or blow it out, whatever, however you want to call it, you know how wide all of this, or how much surface area you have in all of these parts to work with, because that's going to be important. Now, I say this again, but I just want to be very clear that what you draw is going to look different than what you put on here. Those drawings really are just for the purpose of scale and the purpose of some spacing. There is a way, I am sure, to distort your image to go around the form. I don't know what that is. It probably is a computer program that I don't know how to use. So we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way. Now that you have these measurements that should equate to your vessel form, you are going to have to figure out how to make your surface area the way that it's actually going to be transferred. So at this point, we're making a transfer. I do want to say that at this point, you may or may not need to go through this entire process. Your surface design might be a lot simpler than mine. I've chosen to do a few things so that I can show you how important certain things are. I think it's important to know this and understand how this is going to work out. I'm going to do this through images because it was easier for me to do a step-by-step through images. So we have our form here. And what I'm going to show you is how to turn this form into a layout of your entire vessel, kind of like they make a flat globe. When you see a map that looks like a flat globe, that's essentially what we're doing. And this is going to get our spacing right for when we actually go to transfer. So keep this handy and let me walk you through this. The first thing that you are going to do is kind of figure out where your belly is, or the widest part of your vessel, and know what that is. So that's 17.5 inches around that whole belly. So the circumference is 17.5 inches. So what you're going to do is make your paper 17.5 inches. Now we already know that a normal size paper is only 11 inches. So if you do have to expand your paper to get to 17.5 inches, so 12 plus 7.5, that'll be 5.5. You can expand your paper and tape it together. Tape it together on the back, and then when you flip it over, you're just going to put little tabs on this side just to hold this from flying out. So you will not see, you won't have a line of tape running down your whole piece, but you do want to get that going. Now, if it happens to be where you're higher than 8.5, which is the height of a typical computer sheet of paper, it depends on how much information you have at the top. That's going to determine if you really care. If you feel like you've got to have that up there, maybe your work comes way out like this, and you really need to know how that expands up there, then go ahead and tape paper at the top. I did not feel it was necessary at all. I was able to get up to here, and I already know that up through here is only a design anyway. I'm not going to even do that until I figure out what's happening through here. So I'm not worried about that at all. But I definitely need my paper to be as big as my widest point. Tape your paper together if you need to. Once your paper is taped together, you are going to fold it in half, and that becomes your center line. So you can see where I have folded my work in half, and that is the center line. From this center line, I'm going to be doing all of my measuring. In order to start measuring, you do want a base line here, so go ahead and draw a base line in there, and you're going to use this central line to start measuring up, and you're measuring from the base line to each line. That's going to show you where these are going to fall. So I know that this is 1/4 inch, so I've already marked my 1/4 inch. From that base line again, I'm going to measure to my second line, which is 1 3/8 inches. So I'm going to measure up 1 3/8 inches. Of course, if you deal with some centimeters, you're going to be measuring in centimeters. From the base line to that line, I've got 3 1/8 inches, 3 1/8 inches. to that line, and so on and so forth. Now this is where things start getting a little weird because again, we're taking our vessel and we're opening it up and we're getting the whole surface area in on one sheet of paper. So if I have 8.5 right now, I need to measure where that ends from my center line. Again, I'm measuring everything from my center line. The easiest thing to do is just take that 8.5 and divide it in half. And that's kind of where you could either, so let me start over. 8.5, half of 8.5 is 4.25. So I can set that down at 4.25. And I know that that part of my ruler is going to be there, and then 8.5 is going to be right there. So I understand that that is my bottom, okay? If you feel like you need to measure one at a time, go ahead and go, 4.25 and then 4.25, and you should be in the same area there. So I know that that's I know that that's the circumference of my bottom. So it's going to look really weird and really distorted. And you're going to do that with each one. Now, I didn't tape my paper together for this demo, but you can see in the photograph here what the rest of this looks like. I'm going to go ahead. My next one is 12.5, which is going to be 6.25 on each end. I'm not going to mark these because, as you can see, it's going to go off of my paper. But this is how you're doing it. The next one, 17.5, you take half of 17.5 and you measure this way and measure this way. And you can see in the image what that ends up looking like. You are going to connect the dots or connect the edges until you get your form. And yes, it looks weird, it's distorted because that is the way that it is. You can see in this image that I have been really sketchy. I've sketched things out. So at this point, I'm just trying to find the placement of things, and I'm not worried about drawing and making anything look perfect and beautiful yet. I just want to find my placement. I just want to find my proportions. I'm trying to figure that out now that I have this stretched out and I can see where my space is. Now, what I am not going to do is make sure that I am putting important information on the outer edges, right? Because where the work is going to come together is going to be a little bit weird, and I certainly want to put my city on the edge there. So try to figure out when you lay this out how you can get as much of the important information in the middle, and the end should be kind of a little less important or a little easier to connect to. Okay. Once I've sketched everything out, I've then come in and I have actually drawn things the way that I want them to look. So this is drawn now. And at this point, I am ready to transfer. But let me talk about a few things before we get too far in that direction. First of all, when I go to transfer, I am probably going to just transfer some of the outlines, maybe some of these inner contours, but for the most part, I'm getting a lot of the outlines. I may not put every single little one of these in, right? I'm going to kind of figure that out as I go. I might do the center one. You can see I've got these centers here, and then this will all be as I'm actually sgraffitoing. Same with my city. My city will probably have some indication of windows or some direction. I'm not worried about that right now. I'm going to deal with that later. I am also going to have birds that are going to end up going into the neck of my work and toward the top. I'm not going to worry about those yet either. I've put them in here because I want to remember that I've got those birds to put in. But once this is actually transferred on, I will then make placement decisions for little things like that. So I have drawn where the important things because those are the things that I'm going to transfer. You know these are going to look a little different when you do go to transfer, but right now you're just getting them as close as you can. It's going to be important to know where those lines are. The problem with Sgraffito is that once you transfer, you're making an indentation in your clay body. So if you make the wrong indentation, it's always there. You can't get it out. You can work with it into your design. Like if you make a mistake, you can problem solve it. But if you make a big mistake, it's not like you can just rib it out. It's not going to happen. Or ribbit. Okay. Now, the next part, you're right now you are ready to transfer. Your pot should have slip on it, and it should be at hard leather hard, and you should be ready to go. Do not transfer before it's at that time. I'll say that again. But what I do want to say now while we're kind of laying flat here, how you go to transfer this is going to depend on the shape of your vessel. When I have a vessel that has a pretty big belly, like you see here, I'm not going to be able to just take this whole piece of paper and put it up against the vessel. It's just not going to work. If you have, I've used it before, the fish in a fish tank. If you have a fish in a fish tank sort of situation, then you may not have to go through all of this to begin with, but you also may not have to use your transfer in its entirety to actually transfer on. At that point, you may be able to cut your certain little pieces out and then place on the transfer. I will show you that as well. I just wanted to kind of run you down some of your options. And I want to say this now in case I forget to say it later. If I am going to cut this out because it's easier for me to transfer it like that, I am going to cut way out here because the way that I want to transfer, I want my tool to be going through the paper or onto the paper and not onto the actual vessel. Okay, that will make sense when I show you how to transfer, but you're going to cut way bigger. So you could definitely lay this out and just start cutting your parts down and transfer them that way. But we will talk on the next step about how that works. If you can make a copy of this, do that before you cut it. You could even, just transfer it onto another piece of paper. If you have transfer paper, you can do that. But I would try to get a replica of this. Another reason why you may want to have a copy of this is because when you are completely finished transferring, this is going to be destroyed. And that means you can't go into an image and work with it. So this is going to be totally destroyed. And what is nice about being able to work with your image at this point is to try to figure out different values. With Sgraffito, you already know that you're going to be removing clay, right? So if I have a dark orange slip over my whole form and my clay is beige or tan, let's call it tan, I know that if I come in here and I start taking my Sgraffito tools away and taking the clay away, I am going to start revealing the clay body underneath, and I'm going to make this whole area lighter, right? This area will end up being lighter than this area. What's really important with Sgraffito is that you don't just outline everything and then maybe put a few details in. You actually want to start showing values. That means if I want my image to look, first of all, I want to decide what I want to do with my background. If I want my background to remain red or the terracotta color, then I don't want to touch it, right? I am going to go ahead and take my clay away from where the birds are because then that will reveal tan. If I want my background to be white, that means I'm going to go in and I am going to carve away all of this to make it, tan. I'm going to carve away all of this to make it tan if I want my buildings to be orange and my background to be tan. You really need to know that, and you need to know your background because you are going to deal with your background first if you're doing anything like that. Where this becomes important is it actually starts showing a lot of depth. So let's get back to my example here. Let's say I'm going to be making these marks, and as I go back into space, I'm going to go lighter, right? If we use the law of intensity and the further you go back, the lighter it gets. That means on this first little grassy knoll, maybe what I'm pulling away are going to be not very much, right? And I'll probably make these actually look like little grasses. Maybe I'll do little V's. But maybe my V's are kind of far away from each other. And then as I go another layer back, maybe my V's become a little bit closer. And maybe they're less distinct as well. So now they're closer. And then as I go back, maybe I'm not even doing V's anymore. Maybe I'm doing a lot of these that are even closer together. And then when I go back more, this is almost going to be completely clear of any clay. That means if I want to take the clay out because I want this to be tan and not orange, I'm going to get in here and really start taking that clay away. So I'm going to have lots of these. These might even be thicker. You can definitely deal with ideas of thickness. Changing your thickness, changing your line quality is going to help do that. So do you see how I've gone from, it's going to be opposite of what I'm drawing. Right now it looks like I'm going from light to dark, but because I'm pulling a dark slip away, it's going to reveal tan, the tan clay body. I'm actually going to be going from dark to light. It's a little confusing because you're working in reverse. It's almost like a negative film, but just understand that that's what you're doing. So that is going to give you depth, right? That's going to give you depth. If this girl is going to be in mostly orange, let's say, because I'm not taking that much clay away from my terracotta red. Sorry, terracotta is like an orangey red, so I know I keep using the wrong words. But if this is going to be my terracotta, and there's still going to be a lot of it there, then maybe my girl ends up being very light. Maybe I carve into my girl and I take most of the clay out. Maybe my cat has little fur and I make the fur really, really thin. I'm sorry, a lot of hair because that's going to make my cat lighter. Right? The more clay I'm taking out, the lighter it's going to be. And that is going to pull my cat away from the background, right? Because the last thing I want to do is have the same value here as I do here. They have to be different. Otherwise, it's going to completely blend together. And you don't want it to blend together. If I know that my background is going to be the terracotta, then I want my tree to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to take more away from my tree. If my background is going to be tan, the color of the clay body, then I'm probably going to want to take less from my tree because I'm going to want to make it a little bit more terracotta color so that it can pull away from the background. Again, we want those contrasts. We want those value shifts. If you're not totally sure how you want to do some of this, that's okay. Start doing what you know. I know for sure that I want my back to be terracotta. So I can even go ahead and put that there. That might be 2 T's. I don't know. Terracotta. And I know for sure that I want these guys to be completely, I want my clay body to show through these guys completely. So this is essentially going to be a silhouette. So it's going to be a white silhouette or a tan silhouette, right? Because that's going to be my clay body coming through. I know that I want that, so I can go ahead and do that right away. I know that I want more detail on her because, again, if we're talking about the laws of depth, anything closer to the viewer is going to have more detail in it than anything further away. So if I want to do that, I know that I'm going to get in here and I'm actually going to do different things here to make her stick out. I'm going to give her detail and I'm going to make sure that she's not blending into the background. Okay, so having this laid out here, it does help you figure out what you want to do. You know, if this is a road, is this going to be a solid terracotta, or are you going to come in here and make lines that give this road direction and don't interfere with what you're already doing here? The last thing that you would want to do with this road is go in and start putting little nicks, right? Because if you put little nicks here and you put little nicks in your grassy area, then it's going to blend together. So my character of line here is going to completely change. I don't, and again, I'm just kind of sketching here, but you want to use your paper to actually do that. And now that my character of line is just kind of flowing with the shape of the road, it is not going to blend in here. Really important. I know that at some point, once I figure out some of this, I am going to come in my office building and I am going to start giving it just a little bit of detail. I don't want too much in my back to interfere with what's happening up here. This is my focal point here. This is my subordination. Do you remember that? I'm having a subordination here, but this is my focal point. So I want to make sure that I'm doing that. This, I could go ahead and say it's behind these other buildings, so maybe it goes in the shadow, and maybe that becomes completely tan, right? Because I'm taking out that, and that might be really nice. So even in my buildings back here, some of them should have more slip taken away and then others. So just kind of know how that's going. I hope that makes sense. That's why this is really important. You are also going to use your scratch pad of clay that I showed you and to see what lines are working well. And that's why it's kind of important to have these here. This is definitely, again, this is your sketch. I could even come in up here. Maybe my direction of line changes, but maybe the grasses down here are carved out and you can really see them in a different way, right? So the whole bottom of my vessel could do something like this. It's nice to have that. It's nice to have that ability to figure out what this is actually going to look like. Hopefully that helps get the job done. Again, the last thing you want to do is just outline everything and call it a day. You need to have 5 different values to make this work. 5 different values. Keep that in mind. 5 different values. Okay, spelled wrong, but whatever. Now I've numbered my values from 1 to 5, 1 being the lightest, 5 being the darkest. Now again, this is going to be reversed when you're actually putting it on, when you actually start to do this on the surface of the jug, or of the vessel. But just know that for this purpose, ones mean I have not sgraffitoed into at all. I have not removed any clay, and I can start labeling anywhere that I haven't removed any clay. So those are my ones that I've established. I do 1s and 5s first. 5's everything that you've completely removed the clay. So I've completely removed the clay here, completely removed the clay here. So those are my 5s. These parts of the buildings that are in the background, if I keep them like that, I've completely removed the clay. Those are my 5s. And then you need to establish what your 3s, 2s, and 4s are. So I know that if 5 is my darkest, 4 is going to be my second to the darkest. So these areas through here are going to be 4s. 3 is going to be a little bit less than that. So my cat is a little bit less dark than my 4. So this and this are kind of the same value, right? Even though the lines are different. Even though the lines are different, that's okay. We want that. And then 2 is pretty light. Like 2 should be just 1 up from 1, and so on and so forth. So I've got 5 values here, but that is how you're going to look at this and how you're going to start working these things out. And if you do these, if you follow these steps, if you consider the element of depth and value, you are going to really be able to pull your work apart and make every little aspect of it pop out. A few things about form and how you're going to transfer. If you were to be transferring onto the surface of a flat tile, you would just take your transfer and put it right on the tile and start going to town. If you were transferring on something that didn't have much of a curve, like maybe it was just kind of a straight sort of thing, you could probably still just take your paper and put it right up against there. You may have to do a few little cuts to kind of pull it together wherever it needs to go together, but for the most part, it's easy when you are transferring for flat surfaces and when you are transferring for something that doesn't really have curves, that's just more of a straight edge, even if it's tapering in or tapering out at the top or bottom. Those things are pretty easy to transfer. Now this big old belly here, oh man, this is not easy to transfer. This is really difficult actually. If this right here, mine is so extreme that I am going to have to take individual pieces and actually start transferring the individual pieces. You, however, may have something that is much less extreme. Maybe your belly doesn't fly out as much. Maybe your form is more like this. You may be able to get away with what I'm going to show you here. And I'm just showing you, it's not how I'm going to do it, but I'm just showing you so you know. With my transfer, you see that my wider areas, where the wider areas are, where the big part of my belly is going to be, I'm going to actually cut this in half right through there, so that my top and my bottom, which are going in different directions, will be able to actually go in different directions. So that's what I've done here. This is actually cut up in a few more pieces, but I have my bottom here, and I've done these little frays here. Now, the more frays that you do, the easier it's going to actually go around. So if I wanted to come in here and make these smaller, it's actually going to conform better than if I don't go around there and do that. So again, this is only if you have a slight bend in your form. And what also is happening here is I'm keeping everything together on the one side. I don't want to totally take them apart. And then you could go ahead and place it on your work, and you can go ahead and start transferring. Now notice that when I'm doing something like this, I'm going to have to make up some information in between there, right? I'm making up information. It doesn't look as good if I have something weird like I'm doing this on my girl here, where even if I had, like the tip of her foot is way over here and this is her leg here. So if you are going to do this, be careful how you cut it. And again, my belly is too big. I can't get away with this as easy, especially in these parts that have information that I can't separate. In parts like a grassy field, that I could totally do that if I wanted to do that and if I felt like I really needed to do that. But I am not going to do it this way. Another thing while I have this out, when something is going out, your paper parts are going to splay out. And some people will put a sheet of paper behind there so that they can fill in the blanks and kind of tape everything together so that they can like put a half of their taped up work over and just completely transfer. It would have to be cut in half, of course, this way. Now, so at the bottom they splay out, and then at the top, they're going to start overlapping, right? You see how that's going to start overlapping, and as a result, you start to lose a bunch of information. The lighting's a little bad here. So that becomes a little bit of an issue there as well. And again, people will go ahead, they'll make smaller fringes, they'll tape everything together and start actually redefining their form and making it right. So that is one way to do it if your form is not giving you too much trouble. We are not going to do that because I just can't with my form. So what I am going to do is start cutting out some of this information. Now, I know that I want to start with my girl in the tree because that is the most important thing to me on this. And everything else can be moved. If I need to move my city, I can move my city a little bit. Now, with my girl in my tree, what I do, I am going to cut it all out as one because I do want to know where these things are starting and ending. I do want to know where she's placed. Once I get it cut out, I am going to probably start cutting it into pieces as well. And I'll show you what that looks like here as we go. So here's my girl and my tree. And again, I want to know where I'm starting and where I'm ending, at least for right now. So I have a good idea of what's happening. I am going to transfer it in sections, but I know I can kind of get away with transferring at least to here. My tree, I'm going to leave a little bit. I don't know what's going to happen just yet, but I have a pretty good idea of how I can transfer here. Now, because this wants to bend and I'm having trouble with that, I can come in with my scissors and just start cutting those little fringes just so this can bend around my form a little bit where I'm going to actually be transferring. And that helps a little bit. You see how that worked out? Nice, nice. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start transferring her. I feel pretty good about that. Once she's transferred in kind of the base of this tree, then I'll know a little bit more about where the rest of my tree is going to fall. If it makes you crazy and you feel like, oh, you have to tape, then you can go ahead and tape if that is what you really need to do. I'm not going to worry too much about it. Now, to transfer this, if you only have a needle tool, go ahead and use that. Just be careful that you are not using the needle tool straight down. So I'm not going to use the needle tool, if this is my sheet of paper, straight. I'm going to set it at the side, and I'm going to use the side of that needle tool to actually go to transfer my design. So I'd be transferring like this, not like this. Okay? If you transfer straight in like this, it's going to just tear your paper up, and you don't want that. We're actually going to be transferring a very light line. If you do have a Sgraffito tool with a little ball on it, that's probably a better thing to transfer with if you've got it. If you don't worry about it. You can also grab a pencil that has a pretty sharp tip. So those are your transfer tools. I'm going to hold this in place, and that's going to be the biggest thing right now, is to hold this in place so that it doesn't move. And I am just going to take my Sgraffito tool or my needle tool or my pencil, and I'm just going to go around the outline of my girl. I am transferring through the paper. So I had mentioned before that I would never want to transfer by cutting my girl out exactly along her contour and then going around. I want to transfer through the paper. I can go ahead and give these contour lines on the inside so that I know where things are. I'm going to need to bend my paper a little bit to get her hand in there. And now that I'm coming out here, I need to flatten. Now this is going to get a little tricky. I'm going to probably bend my paper because I need that to be flat. I could have cut that. That would have been fine too. My line that she's sitting on, that line is going to determine the rest of everything else. My lines that are going to connect are really, really important, where that they connect right, and I want to start where they're really important to me, to the design. So my girl is really important. This line up here, because I want her head to be within that hill for purposes of value, I want to make sure that this line is going to start up here, and I do want to make sure that I show that because it's just so important. And so I will come in here and I will start to put that line in. Now this line is going to change. I'm not sure where I'm going with it yet. It's pretty easy for me to go ahead and put my cat in. So I'm going to go ahead and put my cat in. Now if you're on soft leather hard, your paper's probably starting to break up. Again, that's okay. If it transfers into your work, that's okay. All right. Okay, now, can you see that? It's just a nice, light transfer. That's exactly what I want. Now, in order to do the top of my tree, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this down here because I don't need it anymore. And I really need my tree. My tree is going to be a little bit of an issue because it's going into this neck part. So once I get my tree, I can see that that's where it had stopped. Like I'm lining that up, so that's perfect where that hill was. But I know I am going to need to come in here, and I'm going to need to cut. I'm probably going to cut almost in a radius my tree, so that when I go in, I will have the ability to lay this down flat. So now my tree is laid down flat-ish, and I can continue with the lines that I had just started from the tree trunk. I'm not worried about the detail right now. Now here is where it overlaps and it's weird, so I'm gonna have to start making stuff up, and that's okay. Because I want my tree to overlap my city, I'm definitely going to have to do some weird stuff over there, and I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I might even not fully do my tree on this side, because if I want to put another little puff in, I want to give myself the opportunity to do that. Okay. And try your best not to let things slide. I kind of let that one piece at the top slide around a little bit. That's probably not the best thing to do. Now, I am going to leave this open a little bit because I'm not sure what I want to do there, but I do know that I want to come in and at least get my puffs in. So I had kind of put where I want my value 1. I might go ahead and just put some indication that that's the center of that puff of tree without getting into too much detail. I know that all these lines that I'm putting in, I can make them look a little bit better later when I actually go to Sgraffito. I just want to have some idea that those were my areas that were kind of the center of the tree. So when I go to Sgraffito, I'll be radiating out from these areas here. And that makes sense when I'm actually going in and looking at my work, and when I look at my drawing. Okay? So that's that. I'm going to do some more of this, and then I want to show you a few things about my city that might be a little bit of an issue. I will also at some point talk about where my end meets. You know, I had the end here of my paper. Where that meets is going to be really important on the other side of this, or wherever that comes together. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I have the placement of my girl. Now I want to know where the placement of my city is, because that's going to be the next biggest thing. So these lines that are my hills, that also becomes really important. So I know where my cat is, and I know where that line has come down. So right now I'm just going to kind of reel my paper around until I get to the middle of my city. So my paper just kind of followed, my form as I was rolling around. And now I can line up the bottom of my paper to the bottom of my form, and I kind of want to know where that center city building is, because everything I do is going to come off of that. That's also where my road is. So I'll go ahead. I think my road might change a little bit depending on my hills, right? But I can go ahead and get that road in. And then at least get that center city in, city building. My city is going to be weird because it's going to have to be a little splayed out. So what I'm going to end up doing with my city is actually cutting it down into smaller pieces so that I can kind of work with it in smaller pieces. But right now I wanted to get my lines in or I wanted to get my that center city so that I know that from this point now, I'm going to start pulling away that way. Okay? Once I start getting my city in, then I can define this line that is running along my city. I'm afraid to do it now because I don't know where these buildings along here are going to actually fall, because I'm going to have to probably do something like this with my buildings because they're going around this weird curve here. And that makes things difficult. It's difficult. But again, I'm getting all of the stuff in that's important, and then all the other little lines I will start to fill in. But you can see we're having this drawing is helping me place my items, and it's helping me with the size of my items. I've got my girl in. I've got my city in. That was a little bit of a pain. And I've got my little subordinate focal point here. So I have my 3 main parts in, and now it's about connecting my lines. I know that this line that's running through here dips down and then goes back up a little bit to connect there. So I'm using my, I had made a few copies, and I am using my different copies to look to see what lines are meeting, what goes where. So I am still looking at this, and now that my 3 points are in, I'm going to kind of figure out where my lines are running through. So now I'm going to keep doing that. I'm not worried about these birds. Those are probably going to be the last things that I put in. I want to see how everything else goes first, and then I'll work on those after I actually start sgraffitoing. All my lines are in. Everything is connecting. So this is kind of where those connections were. So I've made sure that everything connects the right way. Those points are just really important. In order to start sgraffitoing, I would not sgraffito the really important things first, because maybe you want to practice a little bit. So I might hold off on my girl because I want her to be detailed and I want her to be good. And I'm going to start with things that I know for sure, like I know that I wanted the little proposal to be completely gone, like there's going to be no orange in there. So I can start doing stuff like that. All of this background information, I might hold off because I need to get my values in the places that are nicer. So yeah, I'm not going to start off with my focal points, but I am probably going to do those before I really start getting into the stuff that doesn't matter. The city is probably the last thing that I'm going to do. Also, something to note that I didn't say earlier, I am on a foam pad, which is helping keep my form because it's a lot easier to kind of deal with this laying on its side. And again, as long as you're firm enough, you can do that. Now, when I go to Sgraffito, I might actually have this more in my lap because it might be easier for me to control than sitting at a table, but that's going to be kind of up to you. Some people definitely just keep their jug upright when they actually go to Sgraffito. Sgraffito, scratching the surface. You know that already by now. And when you do that, you're wanting either your Sgraffito tools, if you have them, you have your wire tools. Those are good for carving. And if you don't have all of these, then just get a pencil with a few different, sharpened to a few different leads, sharpnesses, whatever. I wanted to just quickly show you kind of this idea of a value scale and kind of how sgraffitoing actually goes. Now, hard leather hard. I cannot stress that enough. If this is too mushy, what happens is when you actually go to scratch your surface, all of these little burrs that you see here, they get stuck to your surface. they don't fly off. Do you see how mine just fly off? They're not connected at all. If this is too wet, they're just going to stay connected to that edge. And when that happens and you go to do this, all of your burrs get slapped back in the line. So we really want clean lines here. Some people will even Sgraffito at bone dry, just so you understand how much you've got to let this dry before you can actually start scratching your surface. I don't like to Sgraffito at bone dry because I don't want to inhale the dust that is coming from a bone dry Sgraffito. So you see all of that just can be brushed off, and that's what you want. If yours isn't brushing off, you are not at the right state of clay to actually be Sgraffitoing. I wanted to talk about a value scale. I'd said you needed 5 values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I'm talking about value scale, you know that one of your values is going to be completely they're completely orange in my case, and another value is going to be completely the clay body color. So I can actually take my carving tool to get this done quickly. You know that this value here, there's not going to be a lot of Sgraffito marks in a value like this. I like to say start with less than you think that you're going to need, because you can always fill in. You cannot, however, erase, right? You can't erase. So I know what that value looks like. So this one's going to be a little bit darker. Or I should say lighter. I'm taking more clay away. And take enough clay away to where it actually looks like it's lighter. And then this one's going to be super white. I could have done this with all the same lines. I just want to show you that making different lines is going to add interest to your work. So does that make sense as far as a value scale goes? These two are still pretty close. So I'd probably come in here and maybe make more lines to get this a little bit lighter. You don't need the scale. It's just something to kind of show you how you're going to get different values in this thing. So now these are a little bit too close. But you know what I'm doing. You understand what I'm saying there. As far as actual Sgraffito marks, make sure that you're doing different things. Because that's going to add interest to your work. Different marks are going to look a different way. Whatever your object is, consider that. If you're putting fur on a cat, you probably don't want those marks, right? If you're making grass, what does that look like? If you're making something that radiates, in my case, out of a tree, I probably want to follow that form, right? And I can change that value if I want it to go from light to dark by leaving this open, or I should say dark to light. That gets a little confusing, right? Because again, we're working in reverse. So if I want my middles to pop out, or recess, right now they're recessing because they're the darker one, I can start putting more marks out here to make this a lighter area. Now try not to dig too far into your surface. You're really just scratching that surface. This tile is a little bit wetter than my vessel. Make sure you're practicing on a tile that is similar to the dryness of your vessel, right? Otherwise, it's going to be different. So you get how I'm starting to show value here by this transition. The other thing that you can do if you're wanting larger lines or thicker lines, you can get in here and you can start to carve. And again, notice how beautiful those burrs just pop off. This right here is really wet. Let me see if I can make it not happen. Now, of course it didn't happen. Maybe this. Ooh, there we go. Do you see how that just is still connected? And when I go to wash them off, they make a messy line. That's what you don't want to do. Carving tools, you can really start to take a lot of the slip away. So if there are large areas that you want to remain light, you can use these carving tools to pull out your slip. And that's how she's done. Ooh, something else that's don't forget about things like this that I think are kind of fun to know. Let's say you have a circle here. That's your circle. Sometimes it's nice to just have the outline of the circle left. So if you still need to define a form, but you want it to be a lighter form or darker, because if you're on red clay and you use white slip, then you're going to be carving into red. So you see how I'm making that? That's nice. I like it. So remember, you can do things like that too. Some of the, in the project presentation, you'll see where the whole background has been taken away to where the background is revealing the clay color. That's kind of an example of what something like this would look like. And you can do that. You can do that. Take your background away if you prefer the clay color to show through or to be the bigger part of your vessel than the rest of it. If I took my background away from this, notice I'm doing a lot of kind of at the side with my tool. I'm trying not to dig in. All right, that's how you can take your background away. It's up to you how you do this. I think that my work here is done. I'm going to go ahead and work on mine, and I will show you how that ended up. Now, again, what's important here is that you have your difference in value. What you don't want to do, let's say you have a dog here. This is going to be a beautiful dog. You have a dog. Looks more like a dinosaur. What you don't want to do to everything that's on your work is just to come in here and outline everything and call it Sgraffito. That does not do anything. Do not just outline all of your lines. Don't do it. Make sure that you're actually creating value for your work. I think I will call it a day. Notice the difference in line character, the difference in value. That's what's pulling the objects away from each other and giving them definition. I did more carving than I did actual Sgraffito. Oh, look at that proposal. Isn't that cute? So when I say that I did more carving than I did Sgraffito, I did less of the ballpoint tools and more of the carving tools, or those little wire tools. I'm just in general a carver. I feel more comfortable with those tools. And it does give a different look to carve opposed to scratching the surface. Now I will put a clear glaze on this once it's been bisque fired. And I will put a liner glaze on this that's going to come out of the top and color this. And that same liner, which I believe will be an emerald color, I will come back down here and I will put emerald eyes on the cat. And maybe if there are other things that I want to point out, I could do that. I could put emerald on the book. I could choose one aspect of the city to pull the emerald back into, maybe a window, if I wanted to pull some of that color back into the work. Maybe there's a little emerald diamond engagement ring. It wouldn't be a diamond if it's an emerald. So I do want to pull a little bit of that color for my spots down there. I could, if I had a little more time, do more with this bottom. I feel like these two values are a little bit too close, and maybe I'll come in there and do something with that. There she is.